The market was alive with noise. It was not a normal market with fruit or cloth, but a strange alien market built for livestock. Creatures from many worlds were locked in iron cages, their eyes glowing in fear, their bodies heavy and broken. Merchants shouted, buyers argued, the smell of metal and blood was everywhere. Among all the cages, one cage was bigger than the rest, and inside it stood something that made people stop and stare. She was massive, taller than any human, broader than any beast, her body strong like a wall of stone. The traders laughed and called her useless. They said she was too big to breed, too heavy to work, too strange to understand. She is not a mother, one man shouted. She is only meat, meat for the highest bidder. The crowd cheered, some laughed, but others whispered to each other. Her body was huge, but her eyes were different. They were sharp, bright, and filled with something that should not be inside an animal. It was awareness. It was thought. It was a quiet cry for help. No one wanted to admit it, but many felt a shiver when they looked at her eyes. Rumors spread through the crowd, whispers that she was not born but made. Some said she came from a secret lab. Some said she was the last of her kind. Some said she was cursed, but the traders did not care. To them, she was nothing but weight and meat. The auctioneer stood high on a wooden block, his voice loud like a hammer. Here she is, he cried. Too big to breed, too big to sell, but full of fine meat. Who will take her? The crowd shouted numbers, some laughed, some spat, but no one wanted to pay high. Her size was a danger, her strength a curse. Feeding her would cost more than her worth. The auctioneer grew angry. He shouted again, if no one buys her, she will be slaughtered today. The butchers are ready. The giant creature lowered her head, her chains rattled, her eyes glowed with quiet fire. She did not speak, not yet, but she understood. She knew her fate was close. The sun fell lower, the air grew heavy, and still the buyers argued. Children hid behind their parents, afraid yet curious. Men joked loudly, women shook their heads, the cage creaked with every breath the giant took. And then, silence. From the back of the crowd, a single human stepped forward. He was not dressed like the others, no rich cloak, no bright weapons, only simple clothes and a steady face. He walked slow, his eyes fixed on the giant inside the cage. The auctioneer laughed. Do you come to buy, stranger? Do you come to waste your coins on a beast that will eat you alive? The man did not answer. He only raised his hand. I will take her, he said, his voice calm, firm, quiet, but strong enough to cut through the noise. The crowd burst into laughter. Men clapped each other's backs. Women gasped. Children shouted. He is mad, one man yelled. He will not last a day with her. But the human's eyes never left the giant, and for the first time the giant lifted her head and looked back. Their eyes met, human and beast, but in that moment, something else was born. It was not fear, it was not pity, it was recognition. The auctioneer slammed his hammer. Sold, he cried, sold to the fool who wants to be crushed. Chains rattled, gates opened, the crowd moved back, waiting for blood, waiting for screams. The giant stepped out of the cage, her shadow falling across the ground, her steps shaking the dust. The human stood still, no fear on his face, only quiet strength. And as she passed close to him, she did not roar, she did not strike. She only lowered her head for a moment, as if testing him, as if greeting him. The crowd fell into silence again, whispers spreading like fire. She listens to him, someone said. Maybe she nows him. No, another whispered. He is not a buyer, he is something else. But no one knew the truth. No one understood what had just begun. The human led her away, chains dragging behind, the sun burning low on the horizon. Behind them, the merchants laughed and counted coins, but deep inside, many felt uneasy. Something was wrong. Something was different. The giant was not just an animal, and the human was not just a man. Together, they had stepped into a story the colony would never forget, and in the shadows, unseen eyes were already watching. They knew she was not meat. They knew she was not livestock. They knew she was something much more, and soon they would come for her. But for now, the giant and the human walked side by side, their future uncertain, their bond not yet spoken, but already unbreakable. The story had begun, and nothing would stop it now. The market did not sleep after the giant was claimed. News spread like fire, voices carried from street to street. Every trader, every buyer, every beggar spoke about the human who had bought the beast. They called him a fool. Some called him brave, but most waited for him to fail. At dawn, the auctioneer returned to his block, his voice already sharp, his eyes greedy. More meat, more profit, he shouted. The giant was only the beginning. Today, the real business begins. But the people were not looking at the cages anymore. They were whispering about the stranger and his strange purchase. Children pointed down the road where the man had walked with the chained creature, and even the hunters who usually laughed stayed quiet. It was not common for a human to buy something so large, something so dangerous. The auctioneer pounded his stick against the wooden floor, forcing attention back to him. "You saw her yesterday," he cried. "Too big to breed, too heavy to train, only good for meat." The crowd murmured, some nodded, but others frowned. "She looked like she owned him." "Or stood," one woman whispered. "Her eyes were not the eyes of a beast." "Do not be foolish," the auctioneer snapped, hearing her words. "Animals do not think, animals do not speak, and this one is no different. The man who bought her will learn soon enough." But in his heart, even the auctioneer felt uneasy. He remembered how the creature had lowered her head, how she had not attacked, how she had chosen to walk beside the man instead of crushing him. He pushed the thought away and raised his arms. "The rest of you, make your bids. This market does not wait," he roared. Yet no matter how many beasts were dragged out, no matter how many chains rattled, the people's eyes drifted back to the empty cage, the cage that had once held the giant. That emptiness was louder than the auctioneer's voice. Later, in a small tavern near the edge of the market, buyers gathered around rough tables, mugs filled with bitter drink. They spoke of the man, trying to guess who he was. "Maybe a hunter," one said, "sent to kill her in secret." "No," another replied. "I saw his eyes. He was not afraid. It was like he already knew her." The talk grew louder, theories mixing with laughter, fear mixing with excitement, and in the shadows of the tavern, a quiet figure listened, his face hidden, his hands still. He was not a buyer, not a merchant, not a villager. He was something else, a watcher, an agent, and he had been waiting for this. The news of the giant being sold had reached his masters, and they would not be pleased. For them, the giant was not livestock, not meat, but property. Property that had escaped once before, and now had fallen into the hands of a stranger. The watcher finished his drink and slipped out into the night, leaving no trace. Meanwhile, the human led the giant beyond the edge of the colony, where the land turned dry and quiet. They walked in silence. Chains dragging across the dust, her steps heavy, his steady. At last, far from the noise of the market, the human stopped. He turned, looked up at her, and spoke softly. "You are not what they say, are you?" The giant lifted her head, her eyes bright like stars caught in shadow. Slowly, carefully, she opened her mouth, and for the first time, a voice escaped, low, broken, but clear. "I am not meat," she said, her words trembling like new air. The human did not move, but inside him a storm rose. She had spoken, she had understood. It was the proof of what his instincts had whispered. She was alive, truly alive, with thought and memory, but she was also afraid, her chains heavy, her body scarred, her voice weak. He placed a hand against the chain, not to pull it, but to show her he understood. "They will come for you," he said, "and I cannot fight them alone." The giant lowered her head until her eyes met his. "I do not want to fight," she whispered. "I only want to live." Her words cut deep, simple yet powerful. For a moment, the human saw not a beast, not a weapon, but a person trapped inside a body too large for the world to accept. Far behind them, the colony lights flickered, laughter and greed filling the night. But already, footsteps moved in secret, men with orders, hunters with weapons, shadows searching the dust. The giant and the human did not know how short their peace would last. But the bond had begun, fragile and unspoken, yet strong enough to change everything. The market had sold her as meat, the people had laughed, but the truth was far greater, and soon the whole colony would learn that the purchase of one giant was not the end of a trade. It was the beginning of a war. The night was quiet, the stars spread across the sky like endless eyes. The human walked beside the giant, their path lit only by the pale light of the moons above. Her chains dragged behind, carving deep lines in the dirt, a sound that echoed through the empty land. But even with her size, even with her strength, she moved slow. Lie, carefully, as if she was afraid to break the ground beneath her. The human glanced at her, his face calm but his thoughts heavy. He had bought her to save her, but now he wondered if he had saved himself instead. She was not an animal, not mindless. Her voice had proved it, her eyes had proved it. Yet he knew that every step they took was watched. Every shadow behind them could be a hunter. Every whisper in the colony could be a warning. He stopped near a dry hill, the wind sweeping across the plain, and motioned for her to rest. The giant lowered herself, the earth trembling as her body touched the ground, dust rising around her like smoke. For the first time, her voice came again, weak but clear. "Why did you take me?" she asked, her words slow, broken, as if her tongue had forgotten the shape of speech. The human did not answer at once. He sat on the earth, watching the stars. Finally, he said, "Because you are not meat, because you are not what they think you are." The giant tilted her head, her long hair falling across her face, her eyes shining like liquid fire. "I was not made to live," she whispered. "I was made to end." Her words chilled the air, her voice carrying weight too heavy for the night. The human frowned, his heart pressing against his chest. "What do you mean?" he asked, though a part of him already knew. She turned her face away, her massive shoulders trembling. "They built me in glass walls," she said. "They fed me, trained me, measured me. They called me Titan. They called me weapon." Her hands clenched the dirt, crushing it into stone-like dust. "I was too big, too human, too wrong, so they tried to erase me," she whispered, her voice falling low. The human felt the truth settling like stone. She was not born, she was created, not a beast of nature, but a design, an experiment that someone wanted to forget. The silence. He stretched between them, the night growing colder. Finally, he said, "You are not wrong. You are not a mistake. You are alive, and that means you are more than what they made you for." Her eyes widened, glowing faintly in the moonlight. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever told her she was more than her chains. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, human and giant, and in that moment trust began to bloom, fragile but real. Far away, the colony lights flickered like dying candles, but here, on the open land, something new was being born. The human reached for the chain on her wrist, pulling gently, not to command, but to show her it did not define her. She raised her hand, massive and scarred, and for the first time allowed it to rest near him. The size difference was impossible. His hand could fit within the cracks of her palm. Yet she did not crush, she did not harm. She only let him feel her warmth. A bond was forming, something deeper than trade, deeper than fear, but danger was already moving. In the distance, small lights blinked in the dark, moving fast, steady, organized. The hunters had begun their search. They carried weapons made for giants, nets that could bind mountains, and orders that carried no mercy. The human did not see them yet, but the giant's ears twitched, her head turned, her eyes narrowing. "They are coming," she whispered, her voice low, her tone filled with old memory. The human stood, his hand tightening on the small blade he carried, though he knew it was useless against what was hunting them. "We cannot go back," he said, his voice steady. "We can only go forward." The giant nodded, her chains rattling as she rose, her form towering against the starlight. For the first time, she did not look like a beast. She did not look like meat. She looked like a warrior who had been waiting too long to be free. They began to move again, faster, stronger, their path leading away from the colony and deeper into the barren lands. Every step carried fear, but also hope. Every steed. P carried the weight of choice. The human had chosen her, and now she was choosing him. The land around them whispered with danger, but in the silence between their footsteps, a new story was being written. It was no longer the story of meat and chains. It was the story of a human and a giant, bound not by trade, not by fear, but by something the market could never sell. Trust. And in the dark, the hunters followed, closing the distance, their shadows stretching long across the sand. The game of survival had begun, and neither the human nor the giant knew how far it would go, but one truth was clear. They were no longer alone. They were no longer property. They were partners, and together they would face whatever came next. The wind blew cold across the barren land, carrying dust like whispers of ghosts. The human and the giant moved slowly, their steps heavy but steady, always listening, always watching. Behind them, the colony lights had vanished. Only darkness stretched across the horizon, broken by distant stars. The giant walked in silence, her face lowered, her chains dragging like echoes of old pain. The human kept close, his eyes sharp, his hand ready on his small blade, though he knew it was nothing against the hunters who searched for them. For a long time, neither spoke. Only the sound of footsteps and wind filled the night. At last, the human broke the silence, his voice soft. "Tell me who you are," he said. "Tell me what they did to you." The giant hesitated, her breath slow and heavy, her eyes lost in memory. "I was not born," she whispered, her voice trembling like broken glass. "I was built." The words fell heavy in the air. "In a place of white walls and steel floors," she continued. "They made me grow inside tanks. They filled my veins with fire. They tested my bones until they cracked. They said I would be perfect." Her hand touched to the chain around her wrist, her fingers tracing the scars beneath it. "They called me Titan," she said. "They called me weapon. They called me failure." The human listened, his heart tight, his mind burning with questions. "Failure," he repeated, his voice quiet. The giant nodded, her face dark with shadow. I was too large, too human in my eyes, too soft in my heart, she said. They wanted a beast without thought, but I thought. They wanted a monster without mercy, but I felt mercy. They feared me, and so they abandoned me. She looked at him then, her eyes glowing faintly. They erased my name. They erased my life. They sold me as meat so the secret would die with me. The human clenched his fists, anger rising in his chest. You are not a failure, he said, his voice hard. You are alive, and that means you are more than any of them. Her lips trembled, her eyes softening, as if his words reached places no blade ever could. For a moment she looked less like a giant and more like a lost child searching for a home. But the moment passed quickly, for the wind carried new sounds, the crack of engines in the distance, the low hum of machines hunting across the plain. The giant stiffened, her ears twitching, her voice dropping low. They are close, she said. They never stop. They will not rest until I am taken back. The human looked at her, his jaw tight. Then we cannot stop either, he said. But tell me, if they made you, if they built you, why do they fear you so much? Her gaze turned far away, deep into the past. Because I was not the only one, she whispered. The human's chest froze, the air heavy around him. There were others, she continued. Others made in tanks, others called Titan. Some were beasts, some were weapons, some were worse than death. Her voice grew darker, each word heavy with memory. I saw them fight, I saw them destroy. I saw them kill everything they touched, and I knew I was not like them. I knew I could not be what they wanted me to be. Her hand pressed against her chest, her voice breaking. I am the last of them now, the last Titan they failed to kill. The human felt the truth sink deep inside. The colony, the market, the auctioneer, all of it was only the surface of something larger, something buried beneath layers of fear and lies. If she was the last, then the others were gone. But the people who built her still lived, still hunted, still tried to erase their mistakes, and now they would stop at nothing to take her back. The human stood and placed his hand against the chain, his voice steady. Then we will not let them erase you, he said. Not this time. The giant looked at him, her eyes wide. No one has ever said that to me, she whispered. No one has ever stayed. The wind howled louder, the ground trembling faintly under distant engines. The hunters were drawing closer, their shadows stretching across the plain. The human and the giant rose together, their bodies small and large against the endless dark. She was no longer only a prisoner, no longer only a weapon. She was a story of survival, and now she was his responsibility. Together they stepped forward into the unknown. Behind them, the whispers of the past followed, heavy with pain and secrets. Ahead of them, the whispers of the future waited, filled with danger and choice. The giant knew the hunters would come. The human knew the battle would find them. But for now, with each step they took, the chains felt lighter, and for the first time in her life, the giant began to believe she was more than Titan, more than weapon, more than meat. She was alive and she was free, but freedom had a cost, and the night was only beginning. The night sky cracked with light, engines thundered across the barren land, glowing like red eyes in the dark. The hunters had come, silent no longer, their machines rolling across the plain with dust rising behind them like storm clouds. The human and the giant stopped on a ridge, their shadows long under the twin moons. The giant's breath grew deep, her hands clenching, her chains rattling like broken bells. They are here, she whispered, her voice heavy, her eyes sharp. The human nodded, though his chest burned with fear. He kept his face calm. He had known this moment would come, but not so soon. Not with such force. Below them the hunters spread out, armored men stepping from metal carriers, their suits glowing faintly, their weapons built to pierce even steel. Each carried nets that hummed with power, thick ropes of light that could bind even a creature her size. The leader stepped forward, his helmet shining under the moon, his voice amplified by a machine. "Return the property," he shouted. "Hand over Titan, and you will be spared." His words cut through the night like a blade. The giant flinched at the name. Titan, the name she hated, the name that chained her to her past. The human stood tall, his voice calm, though his heart raced. "She is not property," he said. "She is not Titan, she is alive." Laughter echoed from the hunters, hard and cruel. "You cannot save her," the leader sneered. "She is built to kill, she is built to serve, and she belongs to us." The giant growled low, her voice shaking the earth, but the human raised a hand, stopping her. He stepped forward alone, standing at the edge of the ridge, his figure small against the glowing machines. "You abandoned her," he shouted back. "You tried to erase her, but you failed. She is not your weapon. She is not your beast. She is free." The hunters raised their weapons, red light flashing across the sand. The leader gave the order, "Take them both." The night exploded. Nets of light shot into the sky, whipping toward the ridge. Engines roared louder. The ground shook as machines climbed the hill. The human ducked, rolling across the dirt, the net slamming into stone where he had stood, burning it black. The giant roared, her voice carrying like thunder, her massive arms swinging, the chain on her wrist snapping through the air, the glowing nets tangled with the chain, sparks flying, the hunters stumbling back. She tore the chain free from the rock that held it, her strength shaking the ridge. Her body moved like a mountain in motion, her fists smashing against the ground, the shockwave throwing men off their feet. The human scrambled to his side, his small blade ready, though he knew it could do nothing against such weapons. Still, he would not leave her. Not now, not ever. The hunters regrouped, their voices cold, their orders sharp. "Do not kill," the leader barked. "Bind her, break the human if you must, but bring her alive." The giant's eyes burned bright, her voice booming. "I am not yours," she cried. "I am not Titan." She struck again, her hand sweeping across the ridge, smashing into one of the carriers, metal twisting like paper, fire spilling across the sand. The hunters panicked for a moment, their machines scattering, but they did not retreat. They had hunted her before, they knew her power, and they had come prepared. From the back of their ranks, two massive cannons rolled forward, their barrels glowing with deadly light. The human's eyes widened, his voice urgent. "They will not stop. We must move." The giant looked at him, her chest heaving, her body glowing faintly under the moonlight. She wanted to fight, to end them here, but his eyes held her, reminding her of something greater than rage. With a deep growl she turned, smashing the ground to create a wall of dust and stone. Then she ran, her massive legs carrying her forward, each step shaking the land. The human ran at her side, his lungs burning, his legs fighting to keep up. Behind them the hunters gave chase, their engines screaming, their nets firing into the dust. But the giant's speed was greater than they had expected, her strength more than they remembered. Together they vanished into the darkness, leaving wreckage behind. The hunters regrouped in the smoke, their leader furious, his voice sharp. "She is stronger than before," he growled. "And the human, he has changed her." The others shifted uneasily, for they had seen it too. The bond between human and giant was not weakness, it was power. Power that no chain could hold, power that no weapon could erase. Far away, beyond the reach of the hunter's eyes, the human and the giant slowed, their breaths heavy, their bodies covered in dust. She looked down at him, her voice softer now. "You stayed," she whispered. "Even when they came, you stayed." He nodded, his face firm. "I told you," he said. "I will not leave." Her eyes glowed faintly, a light not of anger but of hope. The hunters had arrived and they would come again, stronger, faster, more ruthless. But now the giant knew something she had never known before. She was not alone, and for the first time in her life, she believed she could fight not as a weapon, not as Titan, but as herself. The night grew quiet once more, but the land still trembled, for the war had only begun. The desert was silent after the chase. The giant and the human rested inside a broken cave, its walls cracked by time, its shadows deep and cold. She sat near the entrance, her body too large to hide, her chest rising and falling with each heavy breath. The human sat by a small fire, its flames weak, its light trembling against the stone. Neither spoke for a long while, only the sound of the fire and the wind filled the air. Finally, the human pulled a small device from his pack, a thin screen glowing faintly. He pressed it, and lines of data spread across the glass. "I stole this from the colony records," he said, his voice quiet. "I needed answers. I needed to know what you really are." The giant turned her head, her eyes glowing in the firelight. Her voice was low, heavy with fear. "You should not know," she whispered. "The truth is poison." But the human shook his head, his eyes fixed on the glowing screen. "The truth is the only weapon we have," he said. He read the words on the device, each one cutting deeper into the silence. Project Titan, Phase 1, human-animal hybrid growth, accelerated size, designed for war, failed subjects terminated, surviving subjects stored for disposal. His voice cracked as he read, his hands trembling. "They called you Subject 7, he whispered. "They called you weapon. They called you meat." The giant closed her eyes, her shoulders shaking. Her voice broke, soft like a child. "They made me in fire and steel. They told me I was born for war. But when I felt mercy, when I felt thought, they said I was broken." She pressed her hand against her chest, her fingers trembling. "They killed the others, all of them. They ended what they made, and I was the last, too large to kill quickly, too strange to sell. So they sent me to market. The human's heart ached, rage filling his chest. You are not broken, he said, his voice sharp. They are broken. They are the monsters, not you. Her eyes opened, glowing brighter, no, wet with tears that shimmered like liquid fire. No one has ever said that, she whispered. No one has ever seen me as more. The human placed the screen down, its light fading, its data burned into his mind. Listen to me, he said, his voice steady. They will not stop, they will come again, because you are proof. Proof that their monsters can think, proof that their weapons can feel, and that terrifies them. The giant leaned closer, her shadow falling across him like a mountain. Then what am I? She asked, her voice shaking. If not weapon, if not beast, what am I? The fire cracked, the flames flickered, and the human looked up at her without fear. You are alive, he said. You are free, and you will decide what you are. The words struck her like thunder, her breath catching in her chest, her chains rattling against the stone. For the first time, she did not feel like Titan. She did not feel like Subject 7. She felt like something new, something unbroken. But even as hope rose, the night outside stirred. Engines rumbled faintly in the distance. Lights flickered against the horizon. The hunters had not given up. Their machines spread across the land, searching, tracking, closing in. The human stood, his blade at his side, though he knew it was useless. They will be here soon, he said. But we are not running anymore, not without knowing the whole truth. The giant looked down, her body trembling, her voice low. There is more, she whispered. Things I never told, things they hid even from me. The human nodded, urging her to speak. Her eyes burned with memory, her voice deep with pain. They built me not only for war, but for something greater. They wanted me to lead, not only to destroy, but to command. Her words made the cave colder, the fire weaker. They designed me to be the first, the mother of a new race, an army of giants who would crush worlds under their steps. The human froze, the truth heavier than stone. That is why they feared me, she said, her voice trembling. Because I was too close to human, too much like them, too dangerous to control, but too powerful to ignore. The silence that followed was sharp, the fire burning low. The human finally spoke, his voice steady but filled with fire. They built you for war. But you will not be war. You will not be what they wanted. You will be what you choose. Her eyes widened, her body shaking, as if his words unlocked chains deeper than iron. The fire flared, glowing against her tears. You believe in me, she whispered, her voice breaking. I do, he said, his voice strong, and I will fight beside you, no matter what comes. Outside the engines roared louder, the hunters drawing near. The cave trembled under the weight of their machines, the shadows of their weapons crawling across the sand. The giant rose, her body filling the cave, her eyes glowing like suns. Her chains rattled once more, but now they sounded like war drums. She was no longer Titan, no longer Subject 7. She was something new, something free. The truth had been revealed, and the hunters would face not a beast, not a weapon, but a living will. And with the human at her side, that will would not break. The ground shook under heavy boots. Engines roared outside the cave, red lights flashing against the stone walls like angry eyes. The hunters had come in full force, not just a few machines, but an army, their shadows stretching long across the desert. Inside, the human and the giant stood side by side, the small fire at their feet fading to embers. The human gripped his blade, though he knew it was no match, his heart steady, his eyes sharp. The giant towered above him, her body trembling not with fear but with power. Her chains clinking like warning bells. They will not stop, she whispered, her voice deep and heavy. They will take me, or they will kill you. The human shook his head, his voice firm. They will take neither, not while we stand together. The cave mouth cracked with sudden fire, bolts of red energy slamming into the stone, shards flying, dust rising. The hunters stormed in, their weapons raised, their voices cold. Surrender the subject, their leader barked, or both of you will die. The giant stepped forward, her eyes burning like suns, her voice rolling like thunder. I am not your subject, she cried. I am not Titan. I am not weapon. I am free. Her roar shook the cave, dust falling from the ceiling, the hunters stumbling back for a heartbeat. Then the fight began. Bolts of light cut through the dark. Nets of power hissed in the air, the cave filled with fire and smoke. The giant moved like a storm, her fists smashing against the stone, her chains whipping through the air like steel serpents. One strike shattered a machine, another threw men across the ground, her strength unstoppable. But for every hunter she struck, 2 more came, their nets glowing, wrapping around her arms, pulling her down. She struggled, roaring, her body straining against the crackling ropes of light. The human darted through the chaos, small against the storm, cutting at the nets with his blade, freeing her again and again. "Stand," he shouted, his voice sharp. "Stand and show them who you are." Her eyes met his, fire and trust burning together. She rose again, the nets snapping, her chains breaking against the stone. Her body glowed faintly, not with fire, not with rage, but with will. The hunters paused, fear creeping into their helmets. The leader stepped forward, his voice sharp. "She will destroy you, human. She is not your ally. She is a weapon, and when she is done with us, she will turn on you." The words cut the air, heavy with poison. The human did not flinch, his voice clear and strong. "No, she will not, because she has chosen. She has chosen to be more than your weapon, more than your monster." The giant's roar filled the night, her body moving faster, her chains striking harder, her voice echoing louder than the fire of their weapons. "I choose," she cried. "I choose my own life." With one final strike, she smashed the ground, the cave floor cracking, the shockwave knocking hunters to their knees, their weapons falling silent. Smoke and dust filled the air, silence wrapping around the broken cave. The hunters lay scattered, their leader crushed under his own machine, his voice lost, his power ended. The giant stood tall, her body scarred, her breath heavy, but her spirit unbroken. The human climbed to her side, his blade still in his hand, his face calm though his body shook with exhaustion. "You did it," he said softly. "You are free." Her eyes lowered, glowing faintly, her voice soft now, like a river after a storm. "I am free," she whispered. "But freedom is not only for me. Freedom must be for others too." The human frowned, his eyes searching hers. "What do you mean?" he asked. She looked out at the night, at the desert stretching far beyond the cave, at the stars above, endless and cold. "There will be more," she said. "Other creations, other chains, other voices silenced. If I am free, I must fight for them too." The human nodded slowly, the truth settling in his chest. Then he smiled faintly, his voice steady. "Then we will fight together, not as weapon and master, not as beast and buyer, but as equals." Her lips curved into something that was almost a smile, a fragile, uncertain smile, but real. She looked at him, her voice soft but strong. "Then I am not Titan. I am not Subject 7. I am who I choose to be." The wind swept through the broken cave, carrying her words into the night. The hunters were defeated, but others would come, stronger and more ruthless. The human and the giant knew their journey was only beginning, but they also knew something greater, something stronger than fear. They were no longer alone. The giant had chosen, the human had chosen, and together they had written a new story. A story not of chains, not of slaughter, not of meat, but of freedom. The desert lay quiet again, but the stars seemed brighter, the night less cold, and as they walked out of the cave side by side, their shadows stretched long across the sand. The future was uncertain, the dangers countless, but their will was unshakable. For the first time in her life, the giant was not what they made her. She was what she chose to be, and that choice would change everything, forever.